My first trip to Africa was in 1970 after graduating from the University of Maryland and studying anthropology and journalism. I came to Germany in 1967 and I went to the Art Academy in Essen to study photography. And I was finished that in 1969 and I got my first assignment, Africa, in 1970, to do a major story in Morocco and Tunisia. I was fascinated and I decided at that time that was my topic, that's what I wanted to keep doing. And I had many stories in Africa on famines, on putches and all sorts of things, but it was always news. And what fascinated me was the magic and healing in Africa. And in 1988, I got an assignment from Geo magazine to do a story on Benin. Now, nobody knew where Benin was. And when I came there, I heard of a priest living on Lac Nokwe, a swamp and lake area, which was mosquito-ridden, and I heard the military and the police do not like to go there. So I went there, and I found the priest, and I was able to live with him in his house, a stilt house in Lac Nokwe. One evening, we were sitting on his terrace, and I heard drums like I never heard before in Africa. They were very wild. And I asked the priest, "What is that?" He didn't answer. I asked him again, "What is it?" And he said, "The devil." Now, that interested me. He didn't want to say more, and I went to my boatsman and told him to bring me where the drums were playing. He didn't want to do it. I gave him a little bit of extra money, and we went to a small island in Lac Nokwe, where there were men dancing in bus skirts. They had two knives. They were cutting deep wounds into their body. I was able to take a few photos, but then they chased me away. And in the boat, I asked the boatsman, what is that? And he kept saying, "Koku, koku." I didn't understand what he was saying. He said, "Voodoo." Oh, I went back to the priest, and he asked me where I was. And I said, "A koku." He pulled out his rosary, knelt down, and started praying. And then I said, I have to come back to this place. The story was published in Geo. The UNESCO came to me after that and asked me if I could do a story for them, work for them in Benin, because they had projects planned. And this was in 1990, after socialism was over and you could travel in these countries. In Benin opened. And I traveled there. I didn't have any connections except the connection on Lac Nokwe. And there was a young man standing in the airport, and he asked me if I needed help, if I needed a guide. I said, yeah, if you can bring me to voodoo ceremonies, you have a job. He just smiled, picked me up at my hotel the next morning, and we drove about 100 kilometers north of Cotonou. And I asked him, where are we going? And he said, to his uncle, Zozegedenge. His uncle has a big ceremony that day called Glingambi. Glingambi translated means bulletproof voodoo. Well, I said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, okay, my uncle is going to ask you to take your gun and shoot him in the stomach. I said, I don't have a gun and I could never shoot anybody. He said, that doesn't matter. When he says that, you say to him, Zoza, if I aimed my gun at you, the barrel of the rifle would melt. I said, yeah, I could say that. And so it happened. When I got there, I was asked, he asked me to shoot him, and I said what I was supposed to say. People started cheering, they were dancing around me, and everybody was happy, and Zoza Godengi smiled. And I was allowed to photograph the ceremony. And after the ceremony was over, he asked me, what do you want here? And I said, well, I'd like to learn everything about voodoo. And he said, well, you'll have to stay with me 3 months. And I wasn't prepared for this because I thought I could start working right away. And so 3 months, I was just able to watch him and see what he was doing. He initiated me, and after 3 months, he gave me a photograph of himself, which he wanted me to put on my windshield window, and he named some villages where I could go with his nephew, Paul Akakbo, my guide. Paul drove me to different villages, and we were accepted. I was able to photograph everything I wanted. After 1 year financial help from the UNESCO, I was able to do many magazine stories and other publications. The New York Times magazine was a cover story, and then Taschen Publishing House in Cologne came to me and asked me if I wanted to do a big photographic book on voodoo. I was very happy, and we made a book, a beautiful book, 240 pages, and many double pages. The first time a book like this has been made. And it sold very many copies in different languages. And after this book came out, I realized I really didn't know anything about voodoo, and I had to keep going. And it was around 1993 that I was so fascinated by the Mamiwata cult that I decided to ask Zosa if he could make a big Mamiwata altar for me that I could bring to Germany and exhibit in Germany. And he thought about it a long time, he agreed, and then he said yes. And the first thing we had to find was an iroko tree where we could cut big branches to make the statues. This was a major ceremony, and the first statue that was made were 2 older men wearing robes, and he asked me to bring them back to Germany and put them on a table to see what happens. And come the next year and tell him if anything happened. They would report to him. I did it, and they reported to him, as he said, and it was okay to do the other statues. First, Mamiwata was carved, 3 different statues of Mamiwata, and then many Tohoso statues, 41 in all. 41 is the holy number in voodoo. Nobody knows why, but it is. And so 41 statues were carved in 6 years. And for each statue, there was a small ceremony, before they could come here. And in 1999, this altar was finished. And we decided to bring about, I think it was about 18 adepts, Mamiwata adepts, the priest, 3 drummers, and some helpers over here. And we traveled through Germany with this altar on different rivers. And it was an amazing trip, 6 weeks, where the altar was, initiated, was activated. And this became the heart of my collection.
When you finish with your music, you play.
Okay, I'm very happy.
I'd been collecting in Africa since my first trip. And I built up a big collection. And after this altar was finished, I collected many, many voodoo pieces. Priests came to me, they wanted to give me pieces. I was accepted. I was accepted as one of them, and they gave me presents. I was able to buy things. The collection got very, very big. And I had storage rooms in Essen. People were interested in what I was storing there, especially after I had this large group of voodoozies in Germany. And I had museums that wanted to borrow things and lend things, and I decided at that time I would make my storage room into a museum. There wasn't that much space. It was only 85 square meter, and which was very small. But we made an attractive museum, and the press started coming, and many visitors wanted to see it, and the museum all of a sudden became established. Yeah, the museum was established and it became quite well known because of the different TV shows and radio shows and press. And the UNESCO gave us a letter of support, said this museum has to be kept up and should be sponsored. And later, ICOM, the International Council of Museums, also gave us support. After the voodoo book, I decided to do a second book, a large book, about voodoo in Africa. So in Ghana, in Benin, in Togo, and also went into other African countries like Niger and Burkina Faso. And I did this with the Könemann Verlag. It came out in 1999, and we called the book Soul of Africa. And 1999 was also the year that I brought the large voodoo group to Germany. And after the book, I decided to make the collection into a museum called the Soul of Africa Museum. And this is where it started. I always had close connection to the Benin embassy in Bonn at that time, and the ambassador was always fascinated what I was doing. And since then, since 1999, all Benin ambassadors to Germany have come to the museum to look at it, to report to their governments back in Benin about this museum. The museum was well known in Benin. And finally, the Benin Minister of Culture also visited the museum, and he was very, very delighted with this exhibition. And he asked me if I couldn't also help him build a voodoo museum in Benin, in Cotonou. Yeah, I was very happy he asked me, and I would have liked to help them, but I didn't hear anything back from them. We got some major gifts in the museum. Like the Cuba collection came from an old anthropologist from Italy who did his research work in Cuba before the revolution. And he was initiated into the Palo religion, so he was a Palero. He had a very large collection of Palo items and Santeria items. He was a professor in Verona, and Italy is a very Catholic country. They didn't support him anymore. And he was heartbroken, and I was friends with him a long time, and he asked me if I would take his collection. Yes, I was thrilled to do it. And I had to start researching and getting into it because I did not know much about Palo. And a very similar thing happened with the Quimbanda cult. This was also a collector and a psychologist who spent many years in Brazil and collected, and he was also initiated into Quimbanda. And he had about over 100 statues. And after he died, they came to me. And so our storage room is full. The big voodoo exhibition in the Soul of Africa Museum, we exhibited the voodoo gods, we exhibited magic, healing, and ochios, the magic protection figures. And then we had a big Mamiwata altar was also exhibited here, twin altar, a throne altar, and the ancestors, the Asen, the Egungun, and very, very many pieces. And it was a very successful exhibition. In 2015, the Anthropological Museum in Hamburg, today called MARC, asked me if I would exhibit my Cuba material in the museum, the Santeria and Palo pieces. I was very happy to do it. It was a big exhibition on 800 square meter, a very successful exhibition with thousands of visitors. 2018, the Römer and Palaeozeus Museum in Hildesheim asked me if I could do an exhibition, a big voodoo exhibition in their museum. I agreed, and I said, I'll move everything from my museum to your museum. And it was the biggest exhibition ever done on voodoo. It was on 1,400 square meter, very successful exhibition. We exhibited all of the Africa voodoo pieces, Cuba, Haiti, and Brazil. After lending the whole voodoo exhibition to the Römer and Palaeozeus Museum in Hildesheim, I decided to do a new exhibition in the Soul of Africa Museum. And the exhibition was called Secrets. 7 secrets that I discovered in Africa and in the diaspora in the last 15 years. Secret number 1, the secret Nji guerrilla society in Cameroon. Secret number 2 was the Puchugunaji from the north of Cameroon. Puchugunaji are talismans used against madness. Then we have the Bizango Society in Haiti, a secret society that was responsible for the zombification. Secret number 4 is Ismaila Butuenchi, the bronze caster. Secret number 5 is the Quimbanda cult in Brazil. And secret number 6, the Palo cult in Cuba. And secret number 7 is Oko, the kingdom in northwest Cameroon, which has many secret societies. Today our collecting is that we do purchase major pieces that are not known in other museums. And recent purchases were Simbi Makaya cult, a skull from Haiti. Very unusual. Simbi Makaya is a secret society that does sorcery. And this skull is incredibly powerful. This was added to the collection very recently. And we have another piece that was collected now in Togo, something new that has come up in Togo, where they're using crosses from churches with a crucifix. And then additional things are added to it. It's actually a cross bochio. Bochio are the fetishes, if you like, where you have many things attached, and they can be used for good or bad. And we are always looking for very unusual pieces that we can add to the collection. Besides the exhibitions that I just mentioned, we did 30 other exhibitions in museums in Germany and international. And we constantly lend things out to other museums. We published 6 books, 3 cinema films, and 3 TV documentaries. What we do every once in a while, we bring oracles and priests to the museum. And visitors who come can have oracle readings done. And we also organize festivals where we have a group of dancers and drummers from Benin and Togo that who live in our area, in the Ruhr and Rhine area, that we can call together if we have a priest over here where we can do a ceremony. And we've done many oracle readings in the museum. It's quite popular. And when we set up our new exhibition, we will bring an oracle here again to do readings. The new exhibition will be called the Voodoo Rainbow, and we will have voodoo in Africa, and diaspora will be exhibited in this museum. We also support artists, and we bring artists here. We now have the artist Ismaila Potenci, of course, in Cameroon, who does wonderful bronze art. We have, in Benin, we have somebody who does appliques, a young artist who we supported, paid for his education, and he's become one of the big stars of applique makers in Benin. And of course, in Haiti, we're supporting the young artist who does the voodoo paintings. We're always looking for new talents to discover and who we support. And we have our own NGO for this. It's called Soul of Africa EV. And with this organization, we have built a clinic for herbal medicine in Benin. We've built a museum in Cameroon, in Oku. We support artists with this. We also support school children. The Soul of Africa EV also does supportive work for the museum. We have started digitizing our museum work. We now have a Zoom webinar tour that can be booked at any time. We have a multimedia guide in the museum that visitors can use. Can be independent, walking through the museum. They don't need to be led. And now we are starting to digitize the whole collection in 3D. And soon we will have this on our internet site, so everybody all over the world can look at the museum. And this is especially important that we can also transfer this back to Africa, that in the countries where we did work and collect, people can see the collection in 3D.